Hey, Veritas Church. I'm Nathan. This is Jake. You probably already know who he is. We're starting something today to help you start to process, maybe recap a little bit the message from Sundays. This isn't your community right now. This is a chance for you to engage with the sermon a little bit more, and we hope apply the sermon to your life right now. These are unprecedented times, and so we want to take steps to help you be equipped, biblically mature, ready to be on mission with what God has for you. So we're going to be in Psalm 46, like Jake preached from yesterday, and just process a little bit of that message to kind of help jumpstart our application for the week. Sound good, Jake?
Let's do it.
All right, profound question. How'd you pick Psalm 46? Was that already what you'd scheduled to preach through?
No, we made an adjustment. So Psalm 46 is a psalm where the psalmist is talking about coping through difficult times and trusting God, even though a lot of stuff go bad. So I thought, that relates. Let's go there.
Stuff's going bad a little bit. Yeah, you had brought out kind of from verse 2, will not fear though the earth gives way, the mountains be moved in the heart of the sea. This cataclysmic stuff, it feels like a lot of people's worlds are being shaken. You use the language of like idols maybe are being shaken away. What are some of those idols or things that are being shaken as you were processing, preparing the message? What were things that you're thinking through that you're seeing shaken in people's lives or could be idols that God is shaking through this?
Yeah. Oh, well, I know for myself, and just an idol of comfort. Things are unknown. I like to have a plan. I like to know, or at least I like to think I know what's going to happen next week. Yeah. And now that's up in the air. So it gives us a false sense of feeling like we're in control. Yeah. So an idol of control, for sure. An idol of even overvaluing our own health and safety, like that. I've been put at fear because am I going to get sick? Or so those things of where our safety really lies, whether or not we're in control or not, have really rocked people's worlds. Yeah.
It's tough because some of those things aren't bad things, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference between an idol maybe and just a thing that might be a good gift from God? How would you say that this thing has become an idol in life?
Yeah, I think when a good thing becomes, like Keller talks about, when a good thing becomes an ultimate thing, it becomes an idol. So it's okay to make plans in life. In fact, it's probably wise to make plans in life.
It's okay to be comfortable.
It's okay to be comfortable. Yeah. But when those things get taken away, if it wrecks you more than it should, then it's probably become too big a deal in your heart. Yeah. If it produces anger and frustration and I just can't relax and it steals my peace, then I loved my comfort too much. Or I loved my plans too much. When God interrupts them and I'm devastated by that, then that's probably become too big a deal.
So if we feel like our whole earth is giving way and shaken, when a genuinely bad thing happens, but God isn't shaken, maybe that good thing became an idol in our lives. So you're kind of saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things you talked about in the message was focusing on God's character or his work that brings comfort, kind of what the psalmist is doing in verse 1. He says, before he talks about the earth giving way, he says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Okay, we talked a little bit about idols and things being shaken. What are some aspects of God's character and work that are giving you comfort or maybe helping you trust God in this time? What are you holding on to for comfort?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the psalmist says, that God is our refuge and strength. He's a very present help in trouble, that God is near. He's a refuge. He's who I can run to. But when you think specifically of the character of God that gives you comfort, is his sovereignty, or that he's in control. Yeah. So even though I'm out of control, or it feels like everything's out of control, he's in control. That is a very comforting thought. And even though a lot of crazy things are happening where people can seem like, oh, where is God? It's like he's on his throne and he's in control, and this isn't surprising him. This isn't making him panic, and that brings comfort to me. So when you believe that about the character of God, then that brings you comfort. So the sovereignty of God is very comforting. As a sinner, the mercy of God is very comforting.
Yeah. When we see those idols in our hearts. Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing like, oh, my God is a forgiving God. Yeah. He's gracious. I take great comfort in that.
And both of those tie really well into, I mean, you brought it up in the sermon multiple times, like Jesus is our ultimate refuge and comfort, right? Like the storyline of the Bible, the theme of God's sovereignty is working justice and mercy together through the finished work of Jesus.
Yeah, when the Lord of hosts is with us, God with us is such a loaded term.
Yeah.
When you understand the whole story of the Bible, it's like that's Jesus, Emmanuel.
Yeah. Amen. That's good. The kind of big idea language you use is fight fear with faith. As I was thinking about this conversation, I wanted to ask you, maybe what's something that you've been afraid of in this season? Or maybe afraid is a really strong word, but you've been finding yourself needing to fight it with faith, right? What are some of those things for you personally?
I mean, leading a nonprofit that relies on the generosity of people is like, oh, what's going to happen to our budget? Are we going to have to let people go? Are we going to have to make cuts? Like there's all those uncertainties where you're like, oh, okay, those are fears that well up here, but this isn't my church. This is God's church.
Amen.
And
am I getting fired today, by the way?
Well, we'll have a conversation after this.
Depending on how this goes. Sweet, go, yeah, good. Okay.
So trusting that, listen, this is not about us. It's not about our jobs. This is about the glory of God, and everything that God is doing is working to His glory, and to move with that is returning to faith. I think maybe more than fear, though, it's fighting frustration.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated that this is happening. I'm frustrated that people are responding this way. I'm frustrated, and even to minister to my own frustration with faith of, okay, God's plans will still be accomplished, and God has been, I have done things that I'm sure would cause frustration to God, and He's shown patience to me, and He's shown grace to me, and that's a faith in the character of God that I turn to even to direct my own heart and actions towards other people.
That's good. What does that look like in the moment? Like you find frustration coming up. Is it a verse that comes to mind? Is there a particular prayer that you pray to kind of center yourself back? Or is it really just moment to moment, letting that stuff come back to you?
Yeah, I think I would like to say that some verse always just pops into my mind,
right.
But actually it probably gets lived out most in community, or especially in marriage, where my wife will point out, like, hey, you're not acting appropriately, or remind me of God and His sovereign control, where it's like, oh, that is true. So there's the importance of community, which could be hard in a time of social distancing, but we need other people's voices in our lives. So I think the good news of God spoken to me by other people, and then being disciplined to be in the Word of God to like refresh.
Yeah.
Like I know that to be true. I need to remind myself that that's true, and that's the discipline that needs to happen frequently.
Yeah, and some of those things we see in Acts 2. The church in Acts 2 was under tremendous social pressure. They end up being persecuted and pushed out of Jerusalem. But the things that they did are exactly what you're talking about. They were in the Word, they were in prayer, they were in community, and they were feeding themselves off of what God had taught them, especially through the Word.
And looking at stories like that, I think what's important in times like this is perspective.
Yeah.
I would guess that the believers in the first century in Acts chapter 2 probably had a lot of fear, even wondering, God, where are you in this? Why are you letting this happen? Persecution is happening. How much frustration and maybe questioning of God happened in the community of faith at that time? But we look back and think, oh, well, God used that to scatter His disciples and spread the gospel. Gives me a perspective now of like, okay, in the moment, I might have a lot of frustrations, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, people may look back and be like, oh, God used that to accomplish His purposes. So even having big perspective now in the moments helps reduce panic.
That's super good, yeah, because I've heard a number of people say over the years, like, oh, we just need to get back to what the church is like in the early days. Maybe God is forcing us to feel what that was like, and it wasn't comfortable, but man, He's on the throne, He's at work, He's moving through it. That's good. One of the points you landed on towards the end was coming out of verse 10. The psalmist writes, "Be still and know that I am God," kind of God's perspective breaking in. "I'll be exalted among the nations, I will be exalted in the earth." You kind of encourage us, we need to take time to be still. Another question just for you. What does it look like for you as you're making decisions for our church, as you're leading a large staff team, as you're leading your family? What does it look like for you to take time to be still and just submit to God's sovereignty?
It's really difficult. Not necessarily finding the time. I like to get up early. I think it's easier to be still at those times. There's no distractions.
I'm very still when I'm asleep at 4 in the morning when you're up. Yeah.
No, being awake.
Okay.
But to read the word early, to pray early. But having time carved out for me, it's different than actually being still. And I have to fight my mind to go to my day and start planning and thinking about that. I think the command is not just to have that time, but what you're doing in that time. Are you really being still, and are you reflecting on the character of God? Not just, I read something. You can read something and never really slow your heart down, slow your mind down, and give your attention to God. So early in the morning is best for me in that,
But what you said there's really important. It's possible to have the time carved out and still miss.
Oh, you could go through the Bible reading plan every year and still not be obedient to this command.
Yeah.
It's being intentional. Okay, when you do read, it's not just a check off like I did my reading today, which has value in itself. But this particular command is saying, okay, don't just reflect, like be still and give attention and just remind yourself who God is and what he's done and what the promises he's made in a way that ministers to your own heart.
What I have to do and kind of set aside times of prayer for myself is, not so quickly go to this meeting or this conversation, this thing I'm leading, but sometimes literally just say, okay, God, like I'm submitting to you. You're on the throne. I'm not on the throne. I just want to be in your presence right now. And it's not the super mystical thing. It's oftentimes a lot of me just like being quiet and trusting God actively by not telling him all of my plans necessarily.
Yeah, for sure.
Any coaching you'd have for us about how to be still? Like, is there something that maybe even if you don't do it, something that'd be helpful for people to go like, hey, put this rhythm in or put this practice in to help you obey this command?
I think Mark Aaron has talked a lot about master the restart.
Yeah.
If you missed a day, start over. Like just continue to practice this discipline, and then allow some empty space in your time. So maybe you say, okay, I'm going to set aside, or it's going to take me 20 minutes to do my reading, and I'm going to probably spend 10 minutes praying. All right, well, add another 10 minutes at time just to slow down and think and reflect. And I think the discipline of sometimes when we get to Bible reading, we're always like wanting to learn something new, and being still and knowing that God is God was not new to this psalmist.
Yeah,
he was reminding himself of stuff he already knew, and that's really important. Like I know that God is in control, but it is still really good for my heart to sit down and reflect on that and tell myself that. I know God is gracious and he's a forgiving God, but it is really good for my heart to sit down and say like, okay, I'm going to remind myself of that and I'm going to reflect on that.
That's good, man. Yeah. The final question I have for you, you kind of hinted at throughout this service, but it's something that I think we're going to build on in the weeks to come, Lord willing. Verse 8 says, "Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he's brought desolations to the earth, on the earth." It's almost this invitation, like come and see who God is, and that flows towards him making wars cease and him being the God that we be still before. But there's a missional call in that, right? As we're moving our hearts to be still before God. Okay, how do we as Veritas step into being missional in this time? There's a lot of places we could go in that, but how do we begin to even think about that process?
Yeah, I think this is the beginning of that, because one of the things that, and you've heard this, we've talked a lot about it around here, is we want to minister out of the overflow.
Yeah.
So it's an overflow of what God is doing in our own lives, in which we minister to other people too. So the beginning of a missional call here is come and behold God.
Yeah.
And if we're people who behold God, and that's kind of a word we don't use anymore, like behold, but the idea of like, I am so captivated by God. I am in awe of God. then that's going to flow out to other people. If you try to share Christ with other people and you haven't beheld him, you're not in love with him, you're not in awe of who he is and what he's done, that's not going to go well.
That's good.
So we have to first be people who have sat at the feet of Jesus, who are in love with Jesus, who are captivated by Jesus. Then we minister of the overflow of that.
That's good. If you haven't stockpiled toilet paper, how are you supposed to give it to people, right? Spiritual
like
toilet paper. And just as a way to finish, Veritas, this is an invitation for us in this season to behold God, sit at the feet of Jesus, and then from there step into the opportunities he's inviting you into. So that's all we got from the sermon this week. We hope this is jumpstarting your application and your processing. Behold Jesus and then bring that into your connection group, bring that into your relationships, in your family, into the community God's put you around. And we're going to see God do some incredible things through this time as we just start with beholding him for ourselves. We love you guys.
Amen.
Thanks for tuning in.